Sometimes, the most dangerous verdict is the one delivered before a single piece of evidence has been seen. On a bright autumn afternoon in downtown Washington, D.C., where polished glass towers reflected an endless stream of luxury vehicles, Officer Ryan Mercer believed he could recognize a criminal with one glance. Years on patrol had convinced him that instinct mattered more than patience. It was a belief he carried like a second badge, one that no supervisor had ever issued but that he trusted more than procedure itself. Traffic rolled smoothly along the avenue as businessmen hurried between meetings, tourists paused to photograph the historic buildings, and hotel valets guided expensive cars toward the entrance of the prestigious Hamilton Grand. The quiet rhythm of the afternoon changed the moment a midnight black Rolls-Royce Phantom glided toward the curb. The car looked flawless. Its paint reflected the city skyline like polished glass. The chrome grille shimmered beneath the afternoon sun. People noticed it immediately. Luxury always attracts attention. Ryan Mercer noticed something else. Behind the wheel sat a black woman, dressed in a simple navy suit with no designer logos, no extravagant jewelry, and no visible attempt to impress anyone around her. Her posture was composed. Her expression was calm. She looked less like someone trying to be noticed and more like someone accustomed to moving through crowded places without demanding attention. Ryan narrowed his eyes. His experience, or what he believed to be experience, whispered that something about the picture didn't fit. He stepped into the street and raised one hand. The Rolls-Royce came to a smooth, controlled stop. The valet froze. Pedestrians slowed their pace. Several people instinctively reached for their phones. The woman inside calmly shifted the transmission into park before lowering the driver's window. "Good afternoon, officer," she said politely. Ryan ignored the greeting. "License and registration." She nodded once. Without argument. Without visible frustration. She opened the leather folder beside her seat and reached for the requested documents with slow, deliberate movements. Ryan watched every motion. His hand rested near his radio. Not because she had done anything threatening. Because he had already convinced himself she would. The woman handed him her driver's license first. "Thank you," she said. Ryan barely glanced at it before shifting his attention back to the Rolls-Royce itself. His eyes traveled across the handcrafted interior, the custom stitching, and the emblem mounted proudly above the grille. His suspicion only grew stronger. "You own this vehicle?" he asked. "Yes." Her answer was immediate, confident, matter of fact. Ryan gave a short laugh that carried farther than he intended. Several bystanders exchanged curious looks. "You expect me to believe that?" The woman remained remarkably composed. "I expect you to verify whatever concerns you have." For a brief moment, Ryan simply stared at her. That wasn't the response he expected. Most people became defensive. Some became angry. Others panicked. She did none of those things. Instead, she folded her hands lightly in her lap and waited. Her patience irritated him. To Ryan, confidence without explanation looked like deception. He leaned slightly toward the open window. "Where did you get this car?" "I purchased it legally." "When?" "A few months ago." "From whom?" "My financial records can answer that if necessary." The answer felt almost rehearsed. Ryan interpreted her calmness as arrogance. He stepped back from the window and looked toward the growing crowd. People had stopped walking. The hotel doorman watched from the entrance. Guests whispered to one another. Someone across the street had already begun recording. Ryan returned his attention to the woman. "I've seen this before," he said loudly enough for those nearby to hear. "Luxury cars. Fake paperwork. Stolen identities. It happens more often than people think." The woman met his eyes without raising her voice. "Officer, assumptions are rarely a substitute for evidence." The sentence lingered in the afternoon air. Ryan felt something inside him resist it. He had already reached his conclusion. Now he only wanted the facts to agree with it. He folded his arms across his chest and looked directly at the woman behind the wheel of the Rolls-Royce. "Step out of the vehicle," he ordered. Ryan Mercer took one deliberate step backward as the woman quietly opened the driver's door. She emerged without hesitation, smoothing the sleeve of her navy jacket before standing beside the Rolls-Royce. There was no fear in her eyes. No anger either. She simply waited, as though she understood that every unnecessary word would only feed the conclusion the officer had already reached. The afternoon breeze carried the faint sound of traffic through the hotel entrance. Valets exchanged uncertain glances. Guests paused beside expensive luggage, pretending not to watch while secretly following every movement. Across the street, several pedestrians lifted their phones a little higher, sensing that an ordinary traffic stop had begun to transform into something far more dramatic. Ryan circled the Rolls-Royce slowly. "This vehicle belongs to you?" he asked again. "Yes." "You expect me to believe someone like you purchased a car worth hundreds of thousands of dollars?" Naomi Carter looked directly at him. "I expect you to verify ownership instead of asking questions you've already answered for yourself." Her voice remained calm, measured, professional. The response irritated Ryan far more than an argument would have. He reached for the registration she had handed him moments earlier, but barely unfolded the document before lowering it again. Instead of reading the information printed across the page, he studied her face, searching for signs of nervousness that never appeared. "You seem unusually confident." "I've learned confidence and truth are not always the same thing," Naomi replied. "Fortunately, the law requires evidence, not impressions." Ryan gave a dismissive smile. "People say a lot of impressive things when they're caught. I haven't been caught doing anything." The sentence landed with quiet precision. Several members of the growing crowd exchanged glances. Even one of the hotel valets frowned, noticing that the officer still hadn't examined the registration closely. Ryan walked toward the front of the Rolls-Royce and glanced at the license plate before speaking into his shoulder radio. "Dispatch, run this plate." Static answered first. Then came the acknowledgement that the request had been received. While waiting, Ryan folded his arms. "So what's your profession?" Naomi offered only a small smile. "My profession isn't relevant to whether I own my vehicle. It becomes relevant if you're lying." "I'm not." Her composure remained unchanged. Not once had she raised her voice. Not once had she attempted to leave. Not once had she shown the slightest sign of panic. To Ryan, that composure only strengthened his belief that she was hiding something. He had stopped gathering facts. Now he was gathering confirmation. The silence stretched between them as more people drifted toward the sidewalk. Hotel guests whispered behind their hands. Camera lenses focused on the officer, the elegant Rolls-Royce, and the woman standing beside it with remarkable patience. Ryan looked at Naomi once more, convinced that experience had already solved the case before the evidence ever could. "I've seen this scam before," he said confidently, "and I'm going to prove it." Ryan's command hung in the air for a moment before Naomi Carter gave a slight nod and stepped completely away from the Rolls-Royce. She closed the driver's door gently, almost carefully, as though respecting the vehicle more than the man standing in front of it. There was no hesitation in her movements, no dramatic protest, no attempt to attract sympathy from the growing audience. Her composure only deepened the contrast between the calm she carried and the certainty Ryan projected. "Hands where I can see them," Ryan instructed. Naomi folded her hands loosely in front of her. "As you wish, officer." Her voice remained steady. That steadiness unsettled him. People who believed they were about to be exposed usually talked too much. They explained. They argued. They begged to be believed. Naomi did none of those things. Ryan walked around the Rolls-Royce once more, inspecting every panel, every window, every detail that confirmed in his own mind that someone like her could not possibly own it. He pulled gently on the driver's door, looked through the rear passenger compartment, and peered into the immaculate leather interior. "You keep this car in excellent condition," he remarked. "I take care of the things I earn." The answer irritated him. It sounded less like a defense than a statement of fact. He opened the trunk. Inside sat only a neatly arranged garment bag, a leather briefcase, and a small overnight suitcase. Nothing appeared suspicious. Nothing suggested theft. Yet Ryan refused to let the absence of evidence disturb the conclusion he had already reached. Behind him, more people gathered along the sidewalk. Hotel employees stood quietly near the entrance. Tourists whispered while recording with their phones. A businessman in an expensive suit glanced at Naomi, then at the officer, clearly wondering why the stop seemed to be growing more confrontational instead of approaching a resolution. Ryan turned back toward Naomi. "What exactly is in the briefcase?" "Documents." "What kind of documents?" "Private legal documents." He smirked. "Convenient answer." Naomi met his eyes. "It is also the truthful one." The radio on Ryan's shoulder crackled. "Dispatch to Officer Mercer. Registration is active. No stolen vehicle report associated with the plate." Ryan pressed the transmit button immediately. Run it again. A brief silence followed. Then the dispatcher answered. Negative. Registration appears valid. Ryan looked toward the Rolls-Royce before slowly lowering his hand from the radio. For the first time since initiating the stop, a thin crack appeared in his certainty. It lasted only a second. Instead of reconsidering his assumptions, he convinced himself the paperwork itself must be fraudulent. He took one step closer to Naomi. Fake registrations exist. They do, Naomi agreed. So do false accusations. Their eyes met in complete silence. For the first time that afternoon, several people in the crowd stopped watching Ryan. They began watching Naomi instead. The dispatcher had found nothing to support Ryan Mercer's accusation, but instead of weakening his confidence, the report only pushed him to search harder for another explanation. In his mind, the answer could not be that he was wrong. It had to be that someone else had become more sophisticated at hiding the truth. He slipped the registration back into its folder without reading it carefully. Naomi noticed. So, she asked quietly, have you verified the owner's name? Ryan looked at her with a faint smile. I don't need a piece of paper to tell me when something doesn't make sense. The law usually does. Her reply was calm enough to sound almost conversational. A few people in the crowd exchanged uneasy glances. One elderly man standing beside the hotel entrance lowered his phone for a moment before muttering. Shouldn't he check the documents first? Ryan ignored the comment. Instead, he gestured toward the Rolls-Royce. A car like this doesn't simply end up in the hands of someone by accident. Naomi tilted her head slightly. No, it usually ends up in the hands of the person who paid for it. The answer drew a few quiet smiles from the crowd. Ryan immediately noticed. His face tightened. This was no longer just a traffic stop. His authority was being observed. Every word now carried an audience. He walked closer until only a few feet separated them. Open the briefcase. Naomi looked at the leather case resting inside the trunk. Do you have a legal basis for that request? I asked you a question, and I asked one first. For several seconds, neither spoke. The silence felt heavier than any argument. Ryan had expected fear. Instead, he found discipline. He had expected excuses. Instead, he found questions that demanded procedure. The radio crackled again. Officer Mercer, dispatch confirms the registered owner matches the driver's license provided. Ryan pressed the transmit button harder than necessary. Run the VIN. Already verified. His jaw tightened. Another piece of evidence had slipped away from his theory. Naomi never celebrated. She simply watched him with the same composed expression she had worn since the beginning. It isn't easy, she said softly, to let facts replace assumptions. Ryan laughed, though there was little humor in it. You think this is over? I think the evidence is trying to tell you something. He looked around at the people watching. Dozens of eyes. Dozens of cameras. Instead of admitting uncertainty, he made a decision that felt safer than changing his mind. If the paperwork checks out, he announced loudly, then maybe the paperwork is the problem. The crowd fell silent. Several faces revealed confusion. Even the hotel valet frowned. Naomi lowered her eyes for only a moment before looking back at Ryan. The most dangerous investigations, she said, are the ones that begin with a conclusion instead of a question. Ryan ignored the warning. In that instant, he became determined to prove his instinct correct, even if every verified fact continued pointing in the opposite direction. Ryan Mercer no longer noticed the traffic moving behind him. The city continued its ordinary rhythm, but the sidewalk outside the Hamilton Grand had become the center of a different kind of courtroom. Every phone pointed toward him felt like another silent witness. Every curious face waited to see whether confidence or evidence would prevail. Ryan refused to believe the answer had already been given. He looked once more at Naomi Carter. She stood exactly where he had instructed her to stand. Her posture never changed. Neither did her expression. She wasn't challenging his authority. She was allowing him to exercise it. That realization irritated him even more. He walked back to the open trunk and lifted the leather briefcase with one hand. It's locked. Yes, Naomi answered. Open it. I'll gladly do so if you provide the legal basis for searching it. You've got something to hide. No. Then prove it. Naomi held his gaze. In this country, the burden of proof doesn't begin with the citizen. The sentence settled over the crowd. A middle-aged woman quietly lowered her phone. A young valet exchanged another uneasy look with his coworker. Even people who had arrived only minutes earlier sensed that something had shifted. This no longer looked like an officer uncovering a crime. It looked like an officer searching for one. Ryan ignored every expression around him. He radioed dispatch again. Any alerts tied to the driver's license? The response came almost immediately. Negative, Officer Mercer. License is valid. No warrants. No criminal flags. Ryan frowned. What about financial crimes? A pause. Nothing in our system. Another dead end. He slowly lowered the radio. Each answer erased another reason for suspicion, yet somehow strengthened his determination to continue. Naomi spoke before he could ask another question. Officer, every database you've checked has given you the same answer. He didn't respond. You've confirmed the vehicle. Silence. You've confirmed the registration. Silence. You've confirmed my driver's license. Still nothing. She continued in the same calm voice. At what point does verification become more persuasive than assumption? Ryan looked away for a brief moment. He knew people were listening. Admitting uncertainty now felt impossible. His pride had become part of the investigation. I've been doing this for 15 years, he said firmly. Experience tells me when something isn't right. Naomi nodded respectfully. Experience is valuable. She paused, but only when it follows the evidence instead of replacing it. For the first time, Ryan had no immediate reply. The afternoon air seemed unusually quiet. No one in the crowd spoke. No one laughed. The silence itself had begun weighing against him. Then, in the distance, several identical black SUVs turned onto the avenue and headed toward the hotel entrance with deliberate precision. Ryan barely noticed them. Naomi did. Without changing her expression, she watched the vehicles approach, as though she had been expecting them all along. The black SUVs rolled to a smooth stop along the curb, their dark windows reflecting the afternoon sun. They did not arrive with flashing lights or blaring sirens. Their quiet precision drew even more attention than noise ever could. Conversations on the sidewalk faded. Phones slowly turned away from Ryan Mercer and toward the unexpected convoy. Ryan glanced at the vehicles for only a second before returning his attention to Naomi. You expecting someone? Naomi answered with complete honesty. I believe so. Her tone revealed nothing else. The first SUV door opened. A man in a dark suit stepped out, scanning the surroundings with practiced calm. Another followed. Then two more. They weren't wearing police uniforms. They weren't local detectives. Their movements were disciplined, synchronized, and deliberate. Ryan frowned. The crowd instinctively stepped back, creating a clear path without being asked. One of the suited men spoke quietly into an earpiece, while another surveyed the area before looking directly toward Naomi. Ryan intercepted them. This is an active police investigation, he announced. You'll need to remain behind the perimeter. The lead agent stopped politely. His expression remained professional. Officer, we're simply here to meet someone. Ryan folded his arms. You can wait. The agent neither argued nor pushed forward. He simply nodded once. Very well. Behind Ryan, Naomi remained exactly where she had been standing. No wave, no signal, no attempt to call attention to herself. She merely watched. The silence became increasingly uncomfortable. Even the people recording sensed that something unusual was unfolding. Ryan tried to regain control of the moment. He turned back toward Naomi. Friends of yours? I know some of them. Who are they? I believe they'll introduce themselves when appropriate. Again, her answer was calm. Again, it gave away almost nothing. Ryan's patience thinned. You're being deliberately vague. I'm answering every question truthfully. Another SUV door opened. This time, an older man in a tailored charcoal suit stepped onto the sidewalk. His silver hair contrasted sharply with the dark security detail surrounding him. Unlike the others, he carried no visible urgency. His confidence came from familiarity, not authority displayed. He looked first toward Naomi, then toward Ryan, then briefly at the Rolls-Royce. His expression changed almost imperceptibly. Not anger, not surprise, recognition. Ryan noticed the exchange immediately. Sir, Ryan called. Do you know this woman? The man answered without taking his eyes off Naomi. Yes. Ryan stepped closer. Can you identify her? The suited man finally turned toward the officer. I certainly can. Before he continued, two additional members of the security detail quietly positioned themselves nearby. They never touched anyone. They simply observed with disciplined attention. The crowd had become completely silent. Even traffic noise seemed distant. Ryan waited confidently, believing the next sentence would finally justify everything he had done that afternoon. Instead, the older man's respectful expression toward Naomi suggested something entirely different. For the first time since stopping the Rolls-Royce, Ryan felt a question form in his own mind. Not about the car, but about the woman he had already judged. The older gentleman adjusted his suit jacket before taking 2 measured steps toward Naomi Carter. He did not rush. He did not hesitate. His calm confidence seemed to quiet the entire street. Ryan Mercer raised a hand. "Sir, I asked you a question." The man acknowledged him with a polite nod. "You did. Can you identify this woman?" "I can." Ryan waited, convinced the answer would finally support the investigation he had spent the last 20 minutes defending. Instead, the gentleman turned toward Naomi first. "Good afternoon, Your Honor." The words landed softly, yet they echoed through the silent crowd with astonishing force. Several people lowered their phones for a moment, unsure they had heard correctly. Ryan frowned. "Your Honor." The man looked back at him. "Yes." Ryan gave a skeptical laugh. "Judge of what?" "A local court." The gentleman's expression never changed. "No." He reached inside his jacket, removed an identification wallet, and opened it just long enough for Ryan to read the federal credentials displayed inside. "My name is Daniel Brooks. I serve as Chief of Security for the United States District Court." Ryan stared at the credentials. His confidence wavered for the first time. Daniel continued in the same composed tone. "The woman you've detained is Judge Naomi Carter." He paused. "A United States federal judge." Silence. Complete silence. Even the traffic beyond the hotel seemed to disappear. Ryan instinctively looked toward Naomi. She had not moved. She had not smiled. She had not celebrated. She simply stood with the same quiet dignity she had maintained since the moment he stopped her vehicle. His mind raced backward through every decision he had made. Every assumption. Every accusation. Every dismissive remark. The questions about whether someone like her could own a Rolls-Royce. The refusal to trust verified documents. The repeated attempts to search for evidence after every official record had cleared her. None of those moments could be taken back. Ryan swallowed. "Why? Why didn't you tell me?" Naomi answered without the slightest trace of bitterness. "You never asked who I was." Ryan opened his mouth to respond. Nothing came. She continued. "You asked what I drove. You questioned what I could afford. You questioned whether I belonged. But you never asked my name before deciding what kind of person I must be." Each sentence was delivered gently. No raised voice. No humiliation. Only truth. Daniel Brooks watched quietly. "So you understand, Officer Mercer," he said. "Judge Carter specifically instructed every member of her security detail not to interfere." Ryan blinked. "She instructed you to wait?" "Yes." Daniel nodded. "She believed you deserved every opportunity to follow the evidence." Ryan slowly lowered his eyes. Around him, the crowd was no longer watching an officer conduct an investigation. They were watching an investigation quietly collapse beneath the weight of its own assumptions. For the first time that afternoon, Ryan Mercer realized the person standing before him had never been trying to win an argument. She had been giving him every chance to choose justice over judgment. No one spoke. The silence that settled over the street carried more weight than any accusation Ryan Mercer had made that afternoon. The crowd remained perfectly still, their phones recording not an arrest, but the quiet unraveling of certainty. Ryan looked from Daniel Brooks to Naomi Carter, then back again. His voice was noticeably lower. "Judge Carter." It was the first time he had addressed her by name. Naomi acknowledged him with a slight nod. "Officer." There was no triumph in her expression. No satisfaction. Only composure. Ryan inhaled slowly. "I owe you an apology." Naomi studied him for a brief moment before answering. "An apology has value." She paused, but only when it is followed by understanding. Her words were calm enough to make the lesson impossible to dismiss. Ryan lowered his eyes. "I believed I was doing my job. I believe you were trying to." She stepped one pace closer, remaining respectful of his space. "But somewhere along the way, evidence stopped leading your investigation. It began following your assumptions instead." Ryan remembered every moment. The registration, the driver's license, dispatch confirming the ownership. Every verified fact had pointed in one direction. He had insisted on walking the other. Daniel Brooks quietly motioned to the security detail, who remained where they were. No one interrupted. This conversation belonged to the officer and the judge. Naomi continued. You asked me to prove I belonged inside my own vehicle. Ryan said nothing. You treated every verified answer as another reason to become more suspicious. His shoulders sank. I know. No. She shook her head gently. I don't think you do. Her voice never became harsh. If you understood in that moment, the investigation would have ended when the evidence ended. Ryan felt every camera surrounding them. Yet for the first time all afternoon, he forgot they were there. He was listening, not defending. Listening. Naomi glanced toward the people standing nearby. Every person watching today learned something. She turned back toward him. The question is whether you did. Ryan answered honestly. I think I judged you before I knew you. I know you did. And I can't change that. No. She nodded. You cannot. Another quiet moment passed. But you can decide what kind of officer you become after today. Daniel Brooks finally stepped forward. Judge Carter has an appointment at the courthouse. Ryan immediately moved aside. Of course. Before leaving, Naomi looked once more at the young officer whose confidence had collapsed beneath the weight of his own conclusions. I became a judge because justice demands patience. She offered a faint, almost sympathetic smile. The law gives us procedures for a reason. They protect innocent people. She glanced briefly toward the Rolls-Royce. And sometimes they protect officers from themselves. Ryan watched as Daniel opened the passenger door. The security detail surrounded the vehicle with quiet professionalism. No celebration. No dramatic display. Only dignity. As the convoy prepared to leave, Ryan realized the greatest consequence of the afternoon was not that he had stopped the wrong woman. It was that he had stopped seeing the person long before he ever began looking at the evidence. The convoy disappeared into the afternoon traffic as quietly as it had arrived. Within seconds, the black SUVs became part of the city's rhythm again, leaving behind only a stunned crowd, a silent sidewalk, and one officer standing exactly where his certainty had collapsed. Ryan Mercer remained motionless. The flashing lights of his patrol car still reflected across the polished surface of the Rolls-Royce's empty parking space, but the scene no longer belonged to law enforcement. It belonged to reflection. Around him, people slowly lowered their phones. Some exchanged quiet conversations. Others simply walked away. The spectacle was over. The lesson remained. Ryan looked toward the stack of documents he had barely examined earlier. The registration had been genuine. The driver's license had been genuine. Every official confirmation had been genuine. The facts had never changed. Only his willingness to believe them had. He picked up his notebook. For several seconds, he stared at the blank page before writing a single sentence. Evidence first. Nothing more. Nothing less. It was the shortest report he had written all day, yet somehow the most important. Across town, Naomi Carter entered the federal courthouse through the same doors she had walked through hundreds of times before. Judges, clerks, and attorneys greeted her respectfully. No one mentioned the traffic stop. No one needed to. She placed her briefcase on the bench in her chambers and looked briefly through the window overlooking the city. Justice, she knew, was rarely dramatic. Most days it was quiet, patient, methodical. It depended on ordinary people making disciplined choices before reaching extraordinary conclusions. That afternoon had simply reminded her how fragile those choices could become. Several weeks later, Officer Mercer attended mandatory procedural training requested by his department. He listened more than he spoke. When instructors discussed confirmation bias, he no longer treated the phrase as an abstract legal concept. He remembered a calm woman standing beside a Rolls-Royce. He remembered verified documents ignored because they contradicted his expectations. Most of all, he remembered a judge who never raised her voice. She never demanded respect. She demonstrated it. Months passed. The video recorded by bystanders quietly circulated online. Many viewers believed the story was about a luxury car. Others believed it was about professional embarrassment. They missed the deeper truth. The Rolls-Royce had never been the real subject. Neither had the badge. The story had always been about what happens when appearance is allowed to speak louder than evidence. Imagine standing there, not knowing whether the next stranger would see your character or only your reflection in polished metal. Justice cannot prevent every mistaken assumption, but it demands that assumptions surrender the moment evidence arrives. That is why courts require proof. That is why procedures matter. And that is why dignity should never depend on someone's profession, neighborhood, clothing, or the car they drive. Officer Ryan Mercer thought he was investigating a stranger. Judge Naomi Carter was quietly protecting the principle that would one day protect him as well. Because the strongest form of justice is not the power to accuse. It is the discipline to let the truth speak before we do.